Well, howdy and greetings from the Washington, D.C. office, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. It's a great opportunity for us to come to you and give you a little update on all the victories that we had at the end of 2015 and here in the early part of 2016. And more importantly, give you a little bit of an update of what we see going on here throughout the course of 2016. When you look at 2015, even though it got off to a slow start, it ended up being a very big year for us. We were able to achieve several of the long-term policy goals that we have had. We lead that discussion with the repeal of country of origin labeling, COOL. Now, COOL is still a hot topic of discussion even after repeal, because a lot of people just kind of wonder why we engaged in this. And the bottom line for us is looking at our overall trade, especially with Canada and Mexico. Canada and Mexico have traditionally been two of the top 5 export markets for U.S. beef. Both of them are easily over $1 billion a piece worth of value to us. So we have to make sure that we maintain our access to both those countries. Unfortunately, the World Trade Organization, the WTO, had ruled against the United States COOL program so that it violated the trade agreements that we had with both Canada and Mexico. And so because of that, both those countries were going to be able to retaliate against us. That retaliation was going to be to the tune of about $1 billion, which would have been absolutely crippling to us as U.S. producers, knowing that we would not have access to either one of those countries and trying to figure out what we would do with the beef that we send to both those countries. Jeopardizing our relationship and jeopardizing our bottom line was not acceptable. So that's why we worked to get COOL repealed. We did it with just a couple of days to spare. The House and the Senate passed the omnibus bill that I'm sure many of you have heard about on December the 18th. Retaliation was supposed to have started on December the 21st. So to be able to get that done with only a couple of days to spare was at least a good victory and prevented that retaliation. Now, there is still the role for labeling in our industry. And that's something we're trying to make sure that everybody understands. But we want to make sure that we as private industry get to drive that discussion. We don't want the government telling us how to market our beef or label our beef. We don't trust the government to do much of anything right these days, much less be in charge of that marketing. So we're going to continue to look at industry-led labels that are going to provide the consumer with much more information that's more valuable and in a way that actually means something to them. In the meantime, we're going to continue to work just to keep the government out of our business. Another win that we had was looking at tax extenders. Most of the George W. Bush tax cuts expired, and for years now we have been working 1 year at a time to try to get those extended. A couple in particular are very important to us in the cattle industry. One of those is Section 179 expensing. This is a program that will allow you to expense up to $500,000 on any sort of capital investment that you make that's worth $2 million or less. Without this program in place, that expensing amount is only $25,000. So as you all know, there's a significant difference between $500,000 and $25,000 when it comes to your overall tax liability. So that's why we have been working feverishly to try to get this program put back in place. Not only were we able to make this program retroactive for 2015, but it is now a permanent program. And this is beneficial for us because that $500,000 will also be tied to inflation, so it will grow over time. So we don't have to worry about each year this program expiring and then trying to figure out how we put it back in place. So a huge win for us. Another big win was taking the conservation easement tax incentive and making that permanent. And then another program that's been very beneficial is bonus depreciation, where you can depreciate up to 50% of a capital purchase in the first year, also having a huge impact on your tax liability. Unfortunately, we were not able to make that permanent, but we were able to extend it out to 2019. The reason why 2019 is important is because it allows us the opportunity to work with a new president and a new Congress on permanent tax reform or new tax reform, which would allow us to try to make this particular program permanent here in the future. So something that we're going to continue to work on, but in the meantime, it provides us some certainty as producers to be able to know how we can plan, how we can use these programs, and ultimately how it's going to impact our taxes. Another big win for us had to do with the Dietary Guidelines. The final 2015 Dietary Guidelines were released, and beef is back in the center of the plate, and we are a part of the overall statement of what a healthy dietary pattern should be. A year ago, the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee came out with recommendations that did not have us in the center of the plate. So for a year now, we have been working with USDA to make sure that they have all the science that's available. Most of that science are studies that have been funded with your checkoff dollars. And this is where the checkoff and the policy sides of NCBA can work very closely together to achieve things that are good for our industry. Even though the checkoff side worked to make sure we had all the studies that showed the benefit and the value of lean beef in a daily diet, we were then able to take all that great information and lobby with it to make sure that ultimately these guidelines reflected our role as a daily dish and something that consumers can feel good about eating. So to be able to have those out there in the final form is a huge win. And even though most Americans don't really think much about the dietary guidelines, it's important because the dietary guidelines have an impact on what's served in all the federal feeding programs, things such as school lunch, what's served on military installations, food stamp programs, and even in federal prisons. And we want to make sure that beef stays on that plate. And so we were able to do that. Again, a win that is tremendous for us in the beef industry. And finally, we were able to get some language put in place that ensures that the congressional intent is very clear to the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service. This is an agency at USDA, in making sure that we as producers are comfortable when other countries are approved to export beef into the United States. So I'll give you an example. We've been working on rules that would allow Brazil and Argentina to export beef in the United States. We are not fans of those rules. We have been trying to stop those rules because both those countries have a problem with foot and mouth disease. One of our biggest issues in this whole process, however, was not necessarily what we saw in Brazil and Argentina, but it was the lack of process that our own U.S. government was going through to approve these countries. They claimed that they went down and did site visits to see what was going on in these countries, but unfortunately there were no reports of those site visits. They never did a robust risk assessment, and a lot of the documents that they gave us that they apparently used to formulate these rules were either in Spanish when it comes to Argentina or in Portuguese when it comes to Brazil. That was unacceptable for us. So we've been able to work with Congress to lay out very clear expectations of how this process should work in the future to make sure that we, as a domestic industry, can be protected from any country that wants to have access to export their product into the United States. As we look at 2016, of course, the focus is on the presidential election. But right now, there's no telling where that's going to ultimately end up. So for us, we're looking at House and Senate races. We want to make sure that we have friends of the cattle industry in both bodies. And we also need to make sure that we have friends from the cattle industry as both Republicans and Democrats. So we have our Political Action Committee, our PAC, which is making sure that we have the money and the resources available to support these candidates, to help with their campaigns, so that way we can get them either reelected or, in the case of a challenger, get them elected to Congress. We look at their voting records, we look at where they're from, we look at what committees they serve on to make sure that they truly are friends of our industry. If they meet all those criteria, then we do everything we can to try to make sure that they become either members of the House or the Senate. So we're going to spend a lot of time in 2016 working on that. But it's also the last year of President Obama's administration, and he has a lot of priorities. A lot of those priorities are around the environmental arena, the Waters of the United States rule, which I know you all are familiar with. We've been talking about this for many, many years. Still one of the biggest land grabs we have ever seen out of the federal government, and would allow EPA and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to come in and basically control bodies of water that are on your farms, and you would have to get a permit in order to utilize those bodies of water. We need to make sure that that does not happen. Even though that rule is in place right now, there is a judicial stay that has been issued that stops enforcement. At any point in time, though, that could be lifted. So we are working with Congress to try to defund any additional enforcement or implementation of this in order to buy more time for the courts to look at the lawsuit that we have filed and that other entities have filed in order to stop this. We do believe that we have evidence in our favor that will ultimately stop this, but now that it's in the court system, it could take 5, 6, or more years and go to the Supreme Court before we get a final decision. But things continue to go in our favor. In fact, the Government Accountability Office, the GAO, just released a report right before Christmas that said that EPA had actually violated the law. They'd broken the law in lobbying for their own rule. This is something that we'll be able to use in our favor as we continue to fight. We are optimistic that we will kill this. It's just a matter of how long it's going to take us. And our top priority for 2016 is passage of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP. Trade's extremely important to us as an industry because it's about maximizing the value of the carcass. The example that we love to use, because I think it really illustrates why trade is important, is the beef tongue. Beef tongue is not something that our consumers here in the United States go out and buy and consume. But our customers in Japan love U.S. beef tongue. And if we can take something that's worth cents per pound here in the United States, ship it over into Japan, it's all of a sudden worth anywhere from $18, $19 to $20 a pound. We get that value as the U.S. producers. When you look at Japan, in 2014, we did $1.6 billion worth of value there, but we did that with a 38.5% tariff. And a tariff is nothing more than just a tax. With the Trans-Pacific Partnership, we take that tariff down from 38.5% to 9% on most cuts. And on cuts like the beef tongue, we actually take it down to 0%. That means more of that money is going to stay in our pockets as U.S. producers rather than going into the coffers of the Japanese government. But we have to get this done as quickly as possible because right now, the Australians have their own side agreement with Japan, and they have a 10% tariff advantage over us. So basically, their product is cheaper in the supermarkets in Japan. And because of that, even though their consumer might really prefer the flavor of our beef, just because Australian beef is so much cheaper, they're going with the Australians. So the Australians are taking our money. Right now, they're taking about $100 million a year away from us when you look at what we saw in 2015. That's unacceptable. So that's why we are putting pressure on Congress to pass the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, as quickly as possible, because it means good opportunities for us as cattle producers. We urge you to come join us at our legislative conference in April as we continue to talk about these issues. We also urge you to watch Cattleman to Cattlemen. Also go to our website, www.beefusa, to find updates on all the issues that we're working on right now. And you can also find an opportunity there to engage your members of Congress. Go to the issues page. You will see all the issues that we're working on, and we have a great function where you can go in, read up on the issue, type in your name, and we will send a letter to your members of Congress for you. So we encourage you to engage in the process because it's the engagement that ultimately makes us successful. And it's also the partnership between NCBA and the Ohio Cattlemen's Association, which gives us strength because you have a very large and a very powerful congressional delegation, and they want to know what you have to say about these issues. So step up, get engaged, get involved, because if we can do that, we'll be able to continue the string of wins that we've had, regardless of who is in the White House. And finally, remember that November the 8th is Election Day. Get out and vote. I encourage you all to participate in this process because the whole world, the whole country is definitely looking at Ohio and deciding who you're going to vote for when it comes to president. Again, we stand ready to answer any questions that you may have, so either go through Elizabeth or any of the team members there, the Ohio Cattlemen's Association, or contact us directly here at NCBA in the Washington, D.C. office at 202-347-0228. We'll be more than happy to assist you. And again, thanks for the opportunity to come in and give you a quick update on what we're working on here in Washington, D.C.